This happened to me at the end of the 80s. I have a lot of time as a trailer driver, and I have a lot of experiences. I remember that it was a double trailer than what I brought, and I had a machinery that went to a farm in Monterey. I had a lot of time in that. I was very good with maneuvers, and when driving at a certain speed through the hills, when the load had to be carried through complicated places, I was almost always the one indicated for the landing since I was the most experienced. When I got to the base, they gave me a sketch. Almost always when they did that, you said, "Oh, I'm screwed." It was rare for them to give you a well-made sketch. Fortunately, I found the entrance to the destination, but I noticed that it was a dirt road, and apparently I had to go inwards, towards the mountain. I didn't know if there were any farms or farms, since it was very deep, kilometers deep. When I got in and drove down that path, unfortunately, when I asked in the first farm I found myself in, it turned out that I had gone the wrong way, so I had to turn around. It was a pretty difficult maneuver. It had a double semi-trailer, which was huge, and I had to go all the way back. The rancher I asked for the address from gave me a reference to where the ranch was, so I went back to my course. Luckily, I finally found the area where he told me he would find that ranch, but I didn't find it. I knew it was in the area, but I didn't find the ranch. I realized I had already gone quite a bit of the way indicated. I remember that they told me that the farm was on the left side where I was driving, but there were only 2 ranches, which were not big anyway and were not farms. I kept driving, but at one point I gave up, and I said to myself, no, this is wrong. I'm going back. I'm very wrong. But I remember that at that moment, when I was about to turn around, there, in the middle of the mountain, I saw a small hut, a hut that was made of old wood, already all scarred, about to fall. It was already getting dark, and with the little light of the sunset, I saw a woman in it, a very pretty woman. I was already a little older. Well, you know, a man who sees a beautiful and lonely woman. I have to admit that I did like the view a lot. But what happens is that this woman was white, or was it? Of a red-haired hair. And she was wearing I don't know if it was a shirt or a dress. But it didn't leave anything to the imagination. Everything was transparent. I was turning around to go back. Obviously, I couldn't drive at high speed. I had to go slow. And in that I was getting closer and closer to her little house. And the closer I got, I noticed something that seemed strange to me. I saw that it had light. In the door you could see a light that illuminated her, and I said, well, the little house was of very precarious wood, and it caught my attention how she did to have light. When I passed next to her, I saw that with her hand she called me to go. She was beautiful. But believe me, I've already been through a lot of things, and that didn't give me confidence. Being an old trailer, I never imagined that such a beautiful woman would have noticed me. And the closer I got, she called me insistently, but she did it in a way that scared me. I know it's weird that a man as big as me, a lonely woman, can be scared, but there in the middle of the mountain, that was very rare. It scared me a lot. I passed by and continued with my way, and without wanting to, suddenly, I don't know what happened, but I already had the farm I was looking for on my side. I wondered how I could have lost her, and now I find her out of the blue. Finally, when I entered, I told the rancher there about that woman and that little house, and he started laughing at me, and he said, "Hey, what are you talking about? If there's nothing there. There was an old woman who I think they said was a witch, but she's dead. And it was a long time ago. She's like more than 10 years old since that old lady died. But now, no. There's no one. I don't know what happened. But I never came back to that zone. And believe me, I hope I never come back to meet something like that again. I don't know what that woman really wanted. I still have the images of her, insisting me to go. Of course not. Of course I wouldn't go. My name is Guillermo, and the story is as follows. I had a workmate. We were trailers. And he, on one occasion, told us an experience. He worked doing the routes that were from La Paz and Tijuana, and on that road he went through the following. And so he told us. On one occasion, when he was back from Tijuana, the owner of the company was waiting for me because they no longer had any more drivers. He told me he was asking me to return again to Tijuana with a container of seafood. It was an urgent delivery, that if it was not done at the moment, we would have problems, since the cargo would decompose with the temperature. For that reason, it had to be done urgently. I told him that I was just arriving and that I wanted to rest for a few hours, and that later I would go. But he tried to convince me, and he told me that he would pay me a lot of extra money. I was very tired, but with what he offered me, I told him that I would do it. So I unhooked the box that was empty, and I hooked the container. It was the night, and at that time I had to go. On the way, I did not stop for anything. The trailer was in perfect condition, so I did not do any scale, and I went with my load. I brought the radio on in my cabin, and there was a very dim light. However, the strange thing began to happen to me when, at 1 in the morning, the radio began to fail. It began to turn off and turn on itself. I turned it off, tried to tune it well, but no. There came a moment when it completely turned off, but that wouldn't end there. The light that was in the cabin, which was very dim, also started to fail. It tipped for a few seconds, and finally it turned off. Also, the board that marked the speed, in the course of 2 or 3 minutes, that happened, also turned off. However, my trailer was still working very well, so I kept going. The front lights were working perfectly. Nothing more than the problem was inside the trailer. I was in total darkness. And in those moments, what I missed the most. I started to hear a voice that I heard in the seat of the co-pilot. It was a very low voice, but I noticed that it was like laughing. It seemed funny to him, as if he had no light. I couldn't see anything. What I did then was with the lighter I had. I turned it on, but I couldn't see anything. It took about 15 minutes like this, only with the light of the front lights. When suddenly the radio started working again, and the light from the cabin also returned, no matter how faint it was. And the moment that happened, I turned back to the dressing room, and there was a person lying down, who was recharged in his arm, who was looking at me, and who was laughing at me. At that moment, I didn't know what to do. He was a young man. I didn't know how to react. I never slowed down so that someone would get on me. So I tried to follow the path. But he didn't want to stop me. And throughout that moment, I kept listening to that person. How he laughed, further on. I saw some patrols and a crane that were making maneuvers. When I got where they were, I stopped but didn't turn anything off. I left my trailer on. I could see that they were rescuing another trailer that had turned. I parked and got off, but without taking my trailer off. I constantly looked towards the shed. And so I walked, until I got to these people. Then, the officer saw me and asked me, "What are you carrying? Why are you walking backwards, looking at your trailer?" And I said, "I'm checking that he doesn't get off." "That who doesn't get off?" "Well, the person who got on my trailer." "Well, I don't know what time he got on me, because I was alone and I didn't stop at any point. The lights in the cabin turned off. And then, all of a sudden, I already had my camera. He was laughing at me, but he didn't say a word. Then they stopped watching. And then they tell me, "Look at the trailer we're rescuing." The driver says the same thing happened to him, that a person suddenly got on his car, but he couldn't control the truck and turned around. We went to see, and there was no one in the cabin, only the injured driver. Hearing that, I was left with a great impression, and even after that, I got sick. I was sick for several days because of the impression, but fortunately I could live to tell it. I think that what appeared to me was so that I would have turned around and that the same thing would have happened to me as another poor trailer. This that I am going to tell you happened to me in the year 2007 when I loaded from San Juan del Rio with destination to a mill in Cuautla de Morelos. I remember that I passed by Palmillas Bay and I went down by Acambay. I took the road of the lagoons of Zampoala like at 1:30 in the morning when suddenly finishing the descent in the second top. My portable turned off, as if I had disconnected the batteries. So I got out to check anything. I was about 4 minutes checking, when in that I noticed that a dense fog fell. I still continued checking the trailer. But when looking again at that fog, I noticed that a silhouette was approaching me. It touches tires because you will know what one imagines, but when I could better distinguish that silhouette I noticed that it was a young woman. She came to ask me a favor. She told me that if I could take her to Cuautla since she was going to get married the next day. It should be mentioned that it was Friday daybreak Saturday. I told her yes, but I just wanted to check a little bit the trailer because it had a fault. She told me that there were no problems and that she would wait for me. When in that, as if by magic, the trailer turned on again. I was stunned, but I didn't give it importance. We got on, and I followed my way to Cuautla. However, as I was speeding, I noticed that the cabin was very cold. I remember that I even offered a cigarette to the girl, who accepted me. When I got to Cuautla, she told me that it was going down there, and she thanked me for having brought it. She got off very grateful for the king. In fact, she even invited me to her wedding. She indicated where the church was, all that in gratitude for having brought her. After that I went to unload, but they told me that they would only receive me on Monday, so I took advantage of that to take a bath and go in search of the church where that young woman would get married. It was 5 in the afternoon, but when I finally found the place, I was surprised, because no guest was coming to the church. I waited until 6 in the afternoon, when I heard the bells ringing, and a priest came out. He saw me and asked me if I was offered something, to which I told him about the invitation that the girl had made me. And the father was surprised. After telling him how it was that I met her, the father said to me, "Look, son, 15 years ago I was going to marry a couple from Toluca, but unfortunately they lost their lives when they were going through the lagoon of Sempoala. It was a tragic accident. And from that day, whenever this date comes, when they were going to get married, the bells ring at the time of their wedding." I was fearful, although also somewhat incredulous. So I went back to the trailer. But nevertheless, when I was coming back, fear invaded me, since when I directed my gaze towards the cabin, I noticed that in the seat of the co-pilot, slightly, I could see the glow of a cigarette lit, as if someone was smoking it. Imagine how scared I was when I saw that. I moved away from the church and went to a gas station to sleep that night. Luckily, I only had that one scare. When I finished downloading on Monday, I went back on that route, already during the day. And my trailer, luckily, didn't stop anymore. My name is Jesus. Everyone calls me Jesse. I'm from Laredo. But it's been a long time since I went to live in Texas. I've been a trailer for more than 25 years. This that I'm going to tell you happened to me in 2004. I left Laredo and went north of Carolina. This happened to me in Oklahoma. It turns out that I stopped in a section of rest of traileros. I was very sleepy. I was a little awake for those days, and even I had to advance to my schedules of rest. For that reason I was very tired and I needed to sleep. While sometimes I fall asleep for 2 or 3 hours, and even if it is very little time, a rest is rest. I remember it was getting dark. I think it was like 7 in the afternoon. When I stopped at the stop, I remember that there was a friend of mine named Horacio, who was also from Laredo. And also, by chance, was there in Oklahoma. But he was going to another destination. We talked for a while before I went to bed. He had bought things for the road. We worked in the same company. And he had parked next to my trailer. We were talking for a little while. And then I told him I was going to sleep. We said goodbye. And I went to bed. I remember that I fell asleep immediately. However, I don't know if after a few minutes, but it was at some point that I woke up. Or rather, I was woken up, since I heard that someone was touching my window. First I thought it was Horacio, but the truth, Oh no, what a hassle. The truth is that I was very tired and I didn't want to get up. So I tried to sleep again. However, when I was already falling asleep again, I heard that they were knocking on my window. A little annoying, I told him to let me sleep, thinking it was Horacio. After doing that, the knocks stopped. When I woke up completely, I think I had slept for about 2 hours, and the truth is that I already felt quite rested. That little while did relieve me, and in that I called Horacio. I had disconnected my phone, and I said, "What's up, dude? What did you want that happened? I heard you touch my window a couple of times." I told him I wanted to sleep. Then he told me, "No, dude, it wasn't me who was touching your window." I said, "And then?" And he told me, "Dude, it was a child, but apart, dude, the child was in your window, but the child was floating, I couldn't see his feet." He told me that he didn't want to wake me up, said that I wouldn't get scared and he better started, and left there. When he told me that, I obviously got terrified. He told me he saw it clearly, and immediately turned on his trailer. He said he was going to stay for a while, but when he saw that boy floating, he immediately turned on the trailer and left without waking up. The truth is that I am grateful not to have seen what Horacio saw, that boy touching my window from the side where I was driving. A trailer is tall, and you wait for someone to touch the window to climb there by the steps, and that child did not do it. That child was floating, a quite ugly experience that I had in a rest stop. A few years ago, a friend of mine who worked as a trailer told me that one night, in one of his many trips he made, when he was passing through a locality called Amaicha del Valle, he saw something that took him out of his judgment for a moment. As he was passing through that road, already very early in the night, he saw with the light of the moon a woman who was climbing up one of the sides of the road. At first he thought it was all a product of his imagination, but to his surprise, when he approached that woman, she raised her hand, as if asking him to stop, to which he did not agree. At that moment, the stories of his companions on the road, about ghosts and strange beings, flooded his head. But this situation did not end there, since when he passed her, and when looking through the mirror of the trailer, he saw a macabre image. His eyes did not believe what he was looking at, since he saw that, along with his trailer, that woman ran at full speed, shouting obscenities and cursing him. But besides that, he could see that the face of that woman, or whatever it was, had red eyes that shone. My friend, the only thing he could do, besides accelerating to the top, was to pray everything he could. He remembers that when he started doing that, he looked again through the mirror, and the woman had disappeared. Sometime later he stopped being a trailer. Maybe it was because of that scare. We all believe that it was because of that, since, as he said, it was the first time that something like that happened to him, because despite the fact that he always heard stories from other colleagues, he never believed that that was true. But the only thing certain is that what he lived was not the only case that is told in that section of the road that crosses the Calchaquí valleys in the provinces of the Argentine Northeast. I was a trailer and we usually traveled in the afternoon or at night. I always went with an assistant. I was tired, he was driving. Everything was going normal as always. I remember it was already darkening. When the trailer started to fail, it turned off first and then it didn't want to start. Because we were already a few kilometers from the gas station, my partner decided to walk there to get help. I decided to stay trying to fix the trailer, since I knew a little about mechanics. About 10 minutes passed. That particular night, the moon shone and the road was alone. When from one moment to another, I began to feel very cold. So I preferred to put myself in the trailer and wait inside, since after all I could not find the fault. I was lying covered with my jacket, when I started to hear howls, and then after that some footsteps outside, but they were very strong and very heavy steps. I heard how they walked all around the trailer. Also besides that, I heard growls, and the steps each time sounded stronger. I got scared and stayed covering myself inside the trailer, and I only stretched to close the doors with the insurance. I don't know how long it took, when suddenly they started shaking the trailer, and the steps sounded heavier and louder. I gathered my courage and took a bar of iron. I thought about leaving, and just then I saw a light that lit the front part, and later I heard my partner screaming that he had gotten help. I ran down and asked him if he had seen anything outside. And he just looked at me strangely and said, "No, we have to go with a man who made me the favor of taking us in his truck. He will take us to the nearest town. I already spoke to the company to inform them of what had happened. They will send someone for the trailer." Already being inside the truck of the man who would take us, he told me that it would have been better if he had gone with my partner at first, because we should never be left alone on that road, since many people disappeared there, and some said they had seen something that was taking them. They said it was a huge black dog with red eyes. I don't know if that's what was out that night, but I'll never forget the terror it gave me to hear those sounds and those strong and heavy footsteps that night surrounded my trailer. I only thank God that they arrived in time. After what happened, I did not stay alone in any road of the. My name is Cesar. I am a trailer with many years of experience in this profession, where you see impressive landscapes, even inexplicable things, that leave you marked for life, for good or for bad. In this case, I ran the month of September of 2009. It had just dawned. On the side that goes from Izmiquilpan to Huachapan Hidalgo, there was a dense fog, which is usually very common at that time of the year, and for those places that fog only let me see a few meters in front of some signs indicating some stops and that the speed was decreasing, since there was a small town on the way already. When leaving the town, I started the march of the heavy unit on a steep slope uphill, while at the same time the cars overtook me with total imprudence by the dense fog. For this reason, all my senses were on, fearing that another trailer vehicle would come from the front. In that, a double-cabin pickup truck began to overtake me on the left. In that, we approached an area where the road would make way between the hill. After this, the lights of a car that I saw coming from the front made me hold my steering wheel with all my strength. In the face of the inevitable tragedy that was to come, and then, this part of the story. I will narrate it with luxury of detail, despite the fact that they were previous seconds, and after the sudden accident. I did not take my eyes off the pickup by the mirror, and I remember that a couple came, that is, a driver and a co-pilot, but while they overtook me, I paid attention and saw in the second row an old lady with a black bow, covered to the head. She looked at me fixedly, and I saw a little boy lying down in his bed. Immediately after, the lights of the car that came from the front made the driver of the pickup hit the strip on my left side, while the car in front of him hit as fast as possible at the edge of his lane. In that I could clearly see how he was getting out of the road, and I lost him in front of the fog. The pickup lost control, and bounced against the hill, giving several turns. At the same time, I also lost control of the unit and ended up being recharged on the side of the hill. After the strong blows, I took my cell phone and called the emergency services. As I got out of the trailer, I heard screams from a young lady who came from the pickup. I heard that she was looking for her son everywhere, thinking that he had left the vehicle, in which I assumed he was sleeping with the lady. The pickup was completely crossed. There were stones, watered down everywhere, and parts detached. A few minutes later, in a cry, that woman found her son under some suitcases. Luckily, they were fine. I walked back the road, where I assumed the other car would be just as hit. It was still my surprise that I did not find anything, while I asked the other drivers who had come after me, that if they did not see him, but no one said to see him. From there the coldest thing ran through my body, and I did not want to assume anything. I just kept quiet and waited for the emergency services. When the ambulance arrived, I clearly saw that they were taking the young lady and her son, and also that old woman, dressed in her black robe, was sitting on top of the ambulance, and I saw the stretcher where the young mother was going. After some time, and giving the statement at the federal police station in Huachapan, the officer in charge told me that I could not go until the lady and her son were given the statement. but they told him that at no time had a black lady come to the hospital. Only the mother and her son came. Behind me was the husband of the young woman, and when I turned to ask him about the old woman, I saw him pale. And he told me that there was no old woman with them. The Federal of Caminos. He only told me that sometimes, things happen that are impossible to explain. Or maybe, that was an angel that accompanied them. Maybe that is the most logical explanation. This happened to me exactly like 10 years ago, when once I went alone in my trailer to the state of Guerrero, for Acapulco, Mexico. I remember that I wanted to shorten my trip, and I took the road from Toluca through Iztapa de la Sal, in the state of Mexico. Due to the delicacy of the cargo and because I was collecting cash, I brought the cabin of the trailer with crystals of 1 inch of armor. It was almost 3 in the morning and passing the place the swing where there are hundreds of caves or grottos at that moment. Just when I was going about 90 kilometers from among the trees, an animal jumped and crashed into the glass. It was such a big impact that even broke my trailer. And incredibly, the glass was supposedly armored. The glass didn't resist, and it broke, even though it was almost 3 centimeters thick. And that was impossible, but it happened. Only a .50 caliber bullet could break it, or 2 impacts at the same point would break it, but an animal never. I remember that it was an animal that crashed, and that because of the darkness of the road I could not distinguish it well, and this touched the floor after the impact. I swear to God, how I felt when the tires of the trailer passed over it, and there I was scared, because I had the suspicions that I ran over someone. I braked immediately, and I reversed, but to my bad luck, I felt that I stepped on that again. The truth that begins to tremble, and I went down to check, and to look up at myself to see what it was. I saw a man under my trailer. I could not believe what I did. I immediately got on the truck, and I did it backwards to get the body out of that subject. When in that I saw the blood dripping from my glass. And when I turned my head to the front, I saw the corpse of a man of about 50 years old, of peasant appearance, and who was disfigured by the impact. I almost fainted, and all I did was get out of there cowardly, abandoning him to his fate. Desperate as I was, I drove a few more kilometers, and just as I left the area of the caves, the trailer began to fail me. The lights stopped lighting me up, and the engine began to stop running. I had to get down with a lamp to check the failure, and at the moment of checking the engine, it was no longer starting. I went up to turn it on at speed, and in that, suddenly, the lights responded, lighting the road, and as that passed, I looked forward, and I saw that there, a few meters, stood the same man that a few kilometers back I had run over. I didn't know what the hell was going on, because that was no longer normal. And in that moment I remembered what my fellow traileros mentioned, that in that wooded area of Toluca I never stopped, not even to go to the bathroom, because that area. I covered my face and began to pray, for it was impossible for a human being to be alive after being run over by a trailer weighing more than 50 tons. It wasn't coherent. In that moment, I exclaimed, "My God, this isn't your creation. Help me, I implore you." And just then, my trailer started. I immediately stepped on the accelerator and once again, I ran over that thing in front of me. I didn't stop until I got to the first open car service store, getting nervous for some cigars. It was almost 5 in the morning, and the cashier was impressed to see my condition, asking if I was okay, but I ignored him. I got back on the trailer and lost myself on the road again. I don't know how I did it, but after 6 in the morning, I was arriving in Acapulco to deliver my cargo. That's when my companions saw the blood on the glass. They were shocked and only said, "I hope you didn't do anything crazy, friend." Around 7 that night, they authorized my return to the city, but I was very afraid and didn't take the same route, instead taking a longer one. After midnight, I was back at my house in Mexico City. When I got out of the trailer, I remembered that the neighborhood dogs were howling and pointing their heads, looking at the top of my trailer, as if something was climbing on the roof. Suddenly, that thing emerged from the trees and vanished into the darkness. For a moment, The dogs chased after it, but never caught it. It seemed to go towards the Cerro de la Estrella. Scared and without saying anything, I fell asleep. Later, I investigated and discovered more similar cases on that road, which some call the Valley of the Nahualas. Some of my companions went through similar experiences. After years, even at night, I feel the presence of that beast, which I think doesn't forgive me. I have nightmares, but I know that God protects me and never leaves me. My name is David Carrasco. I've been a trailer driver for many years, and throughout my life in this job, I've witnessed many paranormal experiences on the road. On the border, I'm known as the border gunner, a nickname I got a long time ago because I like to carry weapons in my trailer for personal defense. I've always done it with the permission of the law, because sometimes the roads can become dangerous. My first experience was in the year 1980, when I made a trip to the state of Guanajuato. That night was cool, and I was listening to music. It was already dawn, and the road was deserted. In the distance, I began to see some lights, maybe a few miles ahead. Those lights seemed to move in a strange way. As I got closer, I realized they were fireballs, and meters later, I felt something happen in my trailer. I heard something walking on the top, and suddenly, I started to hear scratching on my unit, as if they wanted to break the roof. At that time, I was transporting frozen meats. I didn't want to stop for security reasons, and I just kept driving faster. When I looked through the mirrors, that ball of fire was stuck behind me, and even if it sounds crazy, I saw a hand of fire come out and grab the box. My fellow trailer drivers had already told me about those lights, but I thought they were nonsense stories. But there I was, living it myself. Fear took over me, and it was difficult to control the steering wheel. Suddenly, the glass of the windshield began to look like the face of an old woman, and then it began to smell very ugly. I couldn't take it anymore, and I began to vomit because the smell was unbearable. That thing was no longer a ball of fire, but had become a huge black bird. I could hear it laughing, making fun of me. I kept watching with my eyes wide open, trying not to get off the road and crash. The road was deserted, and as I said before, not a single car or truck passed. The worst thing was that the radio had no signal. The nearest town was about 40 kilometers ahead, so I didn't stop. I started to pray as much as I knew, and that had some effect because the rumbling bird made a scream and took off from the windshield. After that, I stopped hearing that noise of the scratches, and I just kept praying. But that didn't end there, because suddenly, an old woman started to come through the window of the co-pilot. After seeing that, it's the last thing I remember, as I crashed against some trees on the side of the road, and in that instant, I lost consciousness. The next morning, I woke up in the hospital. Thank God, it was just some bruises and scratches, nothing serious. My companions told me that I crashed against 2 trees on a curve. I never told them, or anyone, what happened to me, as they would obviously make fun of me and call me crazy. But I think that those fireballs were witches, and I don't know what their goal was that night when they wanted to attack me. It should also be clarified that at that time I still did not carry weapons, but still I doubt that I would have managed to do them any harm. Once I was heading to El Paso, Texas, to deliver frozen products. I came out of Hermosillo, Sonora, and the route was to cross by Chihuahua. A person accompanied me, as they wanted to take advantage of the trip to cross to the United States for shopping. I felt very comfortable, since it was a trip that I did not do alone, and at least I had someone to talk to on the road. In the morning we crossed from Sonora to Chihuahua, through the San Luis port. There we encountered an accident, something ugly and shocking, which in some way left us thinking about it all day. We continued with Chihuahua. The day went by with such tranquility. Already at night, the person who came with me began to ask me if I had not seen strange things on the road, paranormal things that scared me, to which I said yes. And I began to tell him some things that had happened to me. from the things that happened to me as a child to the last experiences I had lived. It was when I arrived at Esperanza town, almost arriving in Ciudad Juarez, that in the distance in the middle of the road, a person came on a bicycle. This person was coming, tumbling from here to there, as in a state of ebriety. I was driving at a lot of speed in my truck. I was almost at my limit. And they did it on roads that represented a risk to me, and with speed it is unlikely that someone would want to stop me to attempt to hit my person with the load. As I told you in the distance, I could see that person who was coming in the middle of the road, fumbling. I changed lights and turned on the cornet, but nothing, it was not removed. When trying to change lanes, I couldn't, since I immediately noticed that another trailer was going alongside me. Turning the wheel wasn't an option, as it would compromise the integrity of the person who accompanied me, my integrity, and the damages that I would cause. I wasn't going to be able to stop the trailer anymore. So I activated the horn for the last time. But nothing. He didn't move. "My God, forgive me," were my last words. When I ran over him with my 18 tires, the impact was clearly heard as I passed over that person's body. My companion that night entered a nervous crisis, and at the same time, it infected me. I felt very bad and panicked, and I didn't stop out of fear. I don't know what happened to me until that moment. My sense of responsibility was lost. Fear trapped me, and I couldn't stop. I decided to stop later in a gas station while my companion cried non-stop. I managed to calm down. I went down to check the trailer. From the portable to the trailer, I flashed trying to find remains of that person, but there was nothing. It has happened to me that sometimes I have run over animals and there were remains of them on the tires. And besides that, they smelled very bad, so it made me very weird. But anyway, if there had been any remains or something similar, I would have decided to go to the authorities to answer for the fact. But since there was absolutely nothing, I decided not to do it. When I was about to leave the place, a person approached me from the ones who attend to one of the bombs. I was a little scared that he would say something to me. "What happened, boss?" I just replied, "Nothing, why?" And he told me, "Are you sure nothing happened? Seriously, no?" "No, nothing happened." Then he told me, "You took the drunk, right?" To which I said, "Which one? I don't know what you're talking about. Be clearer, please." And then this person tells me, "Look, boss, he's not the first to stop here to check if he's already run over someone. Some get off and start washing the tires of the truck. Others call the police and they arrive and do nothing to them. What you saw was a ghost. That was a person who liked to go drunk to Esperanza. And one night he was returning to Juarez drunk on his bicycle. And a trailer took him and killed him. Since that time he appears to get you out of the road and you get in an accident." When he told me that, I was frozen. Because everything was so real. I even felt like the tires passed over him. I thanked him for what he told me and I retired. I told him that what happened was a ghost to the person who accompanied me that night. And he was much more terrified. And since then that person believes in ghosts. This will be an experience that we will never forget. One night he had to make a trip from Puebla to Monterrey. His trips were always long, but he tried to make them as soon as possible to get back to his house faster. He told me that that night it was very late on the road and he said that he didn't see anything at all because of the darkness. He always told us that it's better not to get off the truck because you never know what's out there. Maybe animals, people, or even evil entities. He continued his journey, and in that he saw a trailer standing in the distance. He thought it was a friend of his work, so he stopped and went down. And in that he saw a very scared person. He asked him what was going on, and this man said to him, "Tell them to move away. Tell them to shut up." My father-in-law, shocked, answered, "But who, buddy? Who are you talking to?" And just after that, he also began to hear voices and laments. And it was there when he got scared. Then the other man shouted at my father-in-law, "There he is. He's behind you. He turned around and said he saw a bulge, that it was like the figure of a very tall woman. That it was totally white and that although it was already dark, that thing shone. What he did was get closer to the other man. My father-in-law always told us that he was not very religious, but that time he did feel the need to pray. Fortunately, immediately after that, a trailer passed and he got off with them, thinking that an accident had happened. Este camionero también asuco los lamentos, así que de inmediato fui a su camión, tomó una biblia y la empezó a leer. Dicen que después de eso, esos lamentos se escucharon cada vez más fuertes y más cerca, hasta que, increíblemente, de la nada, ya no se escucharon más. Allí fue cuando cada quien se subió de inmediato a su trailer y siguió su camino. One trailer driver told me that he was going very late and by a road very well known to him, when suddenly, before entering a tunnel, he felt how he detached from his body and began to rise by the heights. All that. He says it was because an entity was causing it. He says he was fighting to get out, while the trailer came out of the tunnel. And even so, he kept rolling like nothing happened. He says that after a few minutes of fighting with that thing that had him in the air, he managed to return to his body. And that guy told him that he was going to take him. But of course he couldn't. After that, on the way, I could see the section in which the truck was alone while he was out of his body. As he said, and it was a section with curves, like 1 kilometer. But I miss it. It was that it never crashed. I think it was an astral projection that it had. The other anecdote was told to me by a trailer in Peru. He told me that one night, he was going from one city to another with a partner to deliver a merchandise. The roads of Peru are absolute desert. Wrecks that seem infinite. And in some sections there are dangerous mountains and ravines. Arriving in Lima, for example, he told me he was tired, and wanted to sleep a little to continue the road. So they lay down in their beds. However, when he was already falling asleep, your partner said something to him. "Hey, stop bothering me." He got strange, and in that his partner again said to him, "Ya, hombre, no me estés pelascando, pero que dices? Si yo no te estoy haciendo nada. Y en eso, escuchan la risa de un niño. Inmediatamente se levantaron y se asomaron afuera. Pero no vieron nada. Así que momentos después, se volvieron a acostar. Cuando en eso, les tocan la puerta. They say that when they got up and looked out the window, they saw a woman with a child next to their trailer. It should be noted that they were in the middle of nowhere. Everything was deserted. They say that when they looked up, that woman said something to them. "Go away. We don't want you here." It was enough to hear that, so that they knew what was going on. So they immediately turned on the trailer and left. Later, this trailerer told me that they found out that in that section, a family had died in an accident. Once I was carrying loads in a double-axle trailer. I was going from Huacho to Pisco. On the way I stopped in Cañete and noticed that there were quite a few cars and trailers stopped. I asked myself why they were all there, next to the road, in the gas station. Then they told me that in Salinas, which is an area far from Cañete, there was quite a lot of fog, and for that reason. Todos estaban parados allí. Pero entonces mi lógica fue que si estaban todos estacionados allí por ese motivo, el camino estaría libre. Yo estaba acostumbrado a manejar en la niebla, ya que en las carreteras del Perú, la niebla más espesa es la que existe en la Pampa Salina, que está junto a Huacho. For this reason, I was very used to the fog and I wasn't very afraid of it. So I decided to go there. There were 2 more people with me in the trailer, so we started to move forward. But nevertheless, I noticed that the fog was very cloudy. I moved forward looking at the yellow line in the center. When in a certain place, the light of my trailer. I saw a person walking down the middle of the road. The trailer was quite big. It was overrun. And so, in order not to hit that person, I got off the road. We almost turned around. But luckily I was able to straighten the trailer. However, that person we saw was a person about 2 meters tall, but the strangest detail was that he had a face as if he had been illustrated with concrete. He was totally black. I remember he had a yellow jacket, like a kind of uniform. The three of us were scared by what we saw. When we had already reached the toll road that was a few kilometers ahead, we were all still scared, so I stopped the trailer for a moment. But the weird thing was that when I tried to turn it on again, it didn't start anymore. In fact, it didn't start anymore. A crane had to come that ended up pulling us. When we checked it, we noticed that the cables had burned and that the water from the battery, which was a new battery, had dried up. Also, that everything that was with energy burned. That place where that happened to us is called Salinas and is between Cañete and Pisco. I remember on an opportunity, being already night, I was very woken up. The road was wet and there was fog. I was just passing through the famous roads of Michoacán, and that made me remember my grandfather and his stories, which always had to do with the Nahualas. For those who do not know, the Nahualas are people who can turn into animals of all kinds. They say that many are dangerous, because they become animals that can be ferocious to feed savagely on other human beings. But that night, that was what worried me the least, since what did bring me too much worry was that I had little gas. I suffer from that bad habit that some trailers have, the habit of not charging fuel when we should, and that's why we risk to continue almost with the right way. And because of that night I was stuck just 1,000 meters from the gas station. I ran as fast as I could to the trailer, and I got off to walk to the station. And on my way, when I was moving a few meters, in that far away, I saw a dog on the side of the road. It was a black dog, whose eyes shone like when the lights illuminate him. What I did was pass by him without looking at him, since I felt that I would bite just by looking at him. And when I passed by I began to hear that dog walking behind me. At that moment they reached my head what my grandfather was saying, and immediately fear and despair took over me, and I decided not to look back. First I thought that was very absurd, but everything changed when, instead of hearing dog barking, I began to hear a horse barking. First I thought it was because of the wet road, so I tried to calm down, and just when I was doing it, I started to hear the howl of a bird. It sounded like a huge one. At that point I got cold feet. And after that I heard the sound that guajolotes make when they are upset. And there I realized that that dog that was behind me a few meters ago had turned into a different animal than what I saw. I was afraid to hear those sounds. And I remember that I really wanted to turn around to see what was happening. But at all times, I remembered what my grandfather said. So that's why I didn't decide to do anything. Since according to him, if I turned around, that would be my end. I know it may sound absurd, I know. But it may be that the witchcraft or the pacts that these people make. Tengan sus condiciones. Tal vez si yo voltiba moriria. O tal vez si no lo hacía también. Ya que en cualquier momento ese perro podía atacarme. Pero no, ya que esa cosa me seguía de cerca. Pero no me hacía nada. Yo no me volteé en ningún momento. Y era solamente por la historia de mi abuelo. De hecho, todavía me atera recordar eso. I decided to move away and continue my way. And luckily I got to the gas station. The guy who was dispatching me looked so pale that he said to me, "Calm down, man. Mules don't do anything." I remember I couldn't answer him anything. But I said everything on my face. And the guy said to me, "Yes, that mule. Antes era un perro, verdad? Al preguntarme eso, yo me quedé helado. Y no podía hablar. Así que este hombre me dijo, cuides, joven, Ya que por estos rumbos, quienes no son de por aquí, tienden a desaparecer. Será mejor que se quede aquí conmigo y no salga hasta mañana. No vayas a tu trailer. No lo leans. Simplemente quédate aquí. I didn't move from that gas station until dawn. In fact, I couldn't even sleep. When the sun started to rise, I loaded the fuel into my trailer and left there. Since that night, I haven't stayed on that road again. And by the way, since that time, I no longer get used to leaving the trailer with the right gas. This was going down the federal highway number 45 in Durango, almost reaching Chihuahua. If I remember correctly, it was near Torreon de Cañas. At that time I was driving a moving truck. It was like 3 in the morning, and I was already quite tired. I hadn't stopped to have dinner, and by that time I felt my eyes were closing. I had already finished my coffee. In that I remember that, in the distance, I saw a sign with an arrow towards the side of the road. And when I looked towards that part, I noticed some little lights in the forest, like houses. That caught my attention, and I slowed down to see more details. When I got closer, I noticed that there were more lights. And in fact, there were several houses. I was surprised that it was such a bright street at that time of the night and in a place that I did not know. So I left the road for the desolation. And I got into that little street, waiting for something open where I could have dinner. Or at least, fill my coffee. Although what I wanted was to rest. But, nevertheless, I did not see anyone. Las casas eran muy viejitas y estaban iluminadas, pero parecía que nadie estaba adentro. Me fui hasta el fondo de esa calle, pero no había nada de movimiento. Ni siquiera escuchaba el viento. Bajé la ventana, pero sentí un leve aire caliente. En eso comencé a tener un mal presentimiento. Sentía como si me estuvieran esperando en algún lado. So I decided to leave that place, and it was there that when I looked through the rearview mirror, I saw a person coming out into the street. I think it was a woman, and she came out of one of the houses, and she started to make signs for me to go with her. I did not stop at all, and in that I saw that the woman began to run towards me. I couldn't tell his face. He looked at her like a blur. And that scared me even more. So I accelerated to the road. And then I left. The next morning I told a friend what had happened, who wasn't very far from there. And he asked me to point him on the map. I showed him where I thought that had happened to me. But he told me that there was nothing there. I couldn't believe it. On my return trip, I was looking carefully. And indeed, in that place, or at least where I thought that had happened to me, when I passed, there was nothing. In fact, I had a trip back there a few days later, and there I could pass a little earlier. And the only thing I found, it was that signal with the arrow, but when I entered that deviation, I did not find anything. I think that signboard can still be seen. I wonder if they passed through that road from Durango to Chihuahua, near Torreon de Cañas. It was more or less like 10 at night, when I left Rio Verde, and I ran into a military redan. They checked me, and asked me where I was going. Luego de eso me dieron luz verde para avanzar. Solo que. They said I did it at my own risk, since at that time the mafia was very heavy over there. But I had to get to my destination without fail. When I finished the climb, I started down the small mountain. And when I was on a curve, I noticed that there was a girl on the side of the road. I saw that she was about 20 years old. I flashed my lights to get her out of the way, but she didn't move, so I lowered my speed and stopped to see what was happening. They were like 1 a.m. The girl had long hair and was looking down. That's why I couldn't see her face. I thought she was crying. And when I approached her, I asked her, "What's wrong? Can I help you?" And when I said that, she turned to me and I saw her. You can't imagine the terror that caused me to see that she had no face. There was only a hole in her face. And in that moment, I saw that she wanted to grab me with her hand. Immediately, I ran to my trailer, horrified. And while I was running, I started to hear a laugh. I arrived at my trailer, scared. I started it and accelerated to gain momentum. I was so scared that I started to cry, and I even felt like throwing up. And when I turned to look in the mirror, I could see that she was still there, in the distance. I accelerated as much as I could until I reached the town, and when I arrived I stopped abruptly and got out of the trailer as quickly as I could, and when I got out I fainted and I didn't know anything else. I remember that afterwards I woke up in the infirmary and there were several of my colleagues. When they saw how I had gotten out of the trailer and how I fell to the ground, they asked me what had happened to me. And one of them asked me something else. He said to me, "You saw the faceless girl, didn't you?" I nodded my head. I told him yes. And everyone told me that I wouldn't go around there at night again. They told me that that was a girl who took her own life, throwing herself at the tires of a trailer. After knowing that, I always tried not to go there at night. I was traveling to a place called Los Azufers, over there in Michoacan. I was listening to the radio, but the signal was cut from one moment to another, so I decided to put on a cassette. At that time, the stereo had a cassette player, but for my bad luck, the stereo ate the cassette tape, so I was a little upset. I had to turn off the radio, but the moment I turned it off, I remember that I was going slowly, since I was crossing a section of many curves, when suddenly, to my surprise, a soldier crossed my path, who was with a black dog. I braked suddenly, and when I lowered the window to look at that soldier, when I saw him, I felt a chill, since that man had blood on his face, and the dog. His eyes shone like a red light. Anyway, I asked him if he was okay. And this soldier, with an imposing voice, said to me, "You're going to have to buy another radio, because that one is no longer going to work." I was surprised by what he said, and I asked him how he knew that the radio was broken. And in that he answers me, "I must learn to respect the souls that we surround here." That left me dead of fear, and I began to advance quickly. And in that I noticed through the mirror, that that dog with whom that soldier was, began to follow me, and he was going at the same pace as my truck. He followed me for about a kilometer, and after a few turns I left him behind. But I kept feeling that they were watching me. I felt as if someone was following me. I was already getting to the first gas station I ran into. I got down and told a colleague who was charging fuel what had happened to me. And this colleague said to me, "Well, you lived to tell it, friend." Right there, in that section of curves, my father was run over by a soldier, and because he couldn't avoid running him over, he lost control of the unit and killed himself. I'll never forget that day, going through that section of curves. On that road in Michoacan, over the years, I have seen many strange things on the road that I simply cannot explain. And of all of these, there are two that really stand out in my mind. The first was on a night trip on Interstate 411. This is outside Tennessee and heading to Georgia. This was a regular 2-lane road through fields with small towns at that time. As I approached an intersection, I saw on one side a hairy creature crouching on the side of the road. I thought it was a bear, since I had seen them before on that same road. But my surprise was that that thing suddenly got up and crossed the road in 2 steps and went into the forest. Definitely, that wasn't a bear. Now that you've seen how a bear moves, you'll understand. These animals tumble and don't take big steps. And yet, that thing. It walked completely upright, and to cross the 10-meter wide road in 2 steps, it had to be close to 2 meters high. That was the first experience that I had. The second was when I left Ohio. I was going through Interstate 64, and again I did it at night, when suddenly something flew out of the woods. It flew very fast. The first thing I thought was that it was an owl. But that thought changed quickly. When this thing made a 90-degree turn and began to fly directly towards me. The only way I can describe it is that it seemed to be a skull with strips of things hanging and flying behind it. And that thing flew directly towards me. I was already preparing for it to go through my windshield, when suddenly, about 3 meters from me, that thing made another 90-degree turn, and I lost sight of it. Honestly, I have no idea what I saw, but what I am very sure of is that no bird could fly the way that thing did. Of so many things that have happened to me on the roads, working as a trailer driver, these two, without a doubt, were the strangest. My name is Alberto. In 2018, they sent me to Aguascalientes to carry a new warehouse. Days before, one of my cousins told me he wanted to go to Guanajuato. So I called him and told him I was going there and that if he wanted, I could give him a ride and leave him at the bus station. He accepted and I picked him up at about 8 at night. That's how we hit the road. He was entertained with his cell phone and I was focused on the road. When I saw it, I saw a silhouette that looked like a woman. I turned on the high beams of the trailer, and my cousin told me, "Hey, look." I told him I was going to see if she needed help, so I slowed down. However, my cousin, very upset, told me, "No, what are you doing, man? Didn't you see his face? Don't stop." But I ignored him and started to take off my seatbelt. And in that, he grabs me from my shoulder. And I turned to look at him and I saw that he was super pale and trembling. In that, he made me look in the mirror and I saw that white silhouette that was floating towards us. And at that moment, we heard a horrendous scream. A dark one. It hit the whole cabin. I immediately stepped on the accelerator and we left. I remember that the road was totally empty. In fact, we had been waiting to not see any vehicle for that section. When suddenly, the trailer started to roll and we started to lose speed until it stopped completely. It no longer lit up. We were totally dark and to top it all off, I couldn't find my flashlight. And in those moments, there, in that darkness, we began to hear that they were hitting the trailer in the back. I was terrified and tried to turn on the trailer quickly, but nothing, it didn't turn on. We were terrified and during all that time we kept hearing the knocks, so we started praying. We had no choice but to pray for the trailer to turn on. And suddenly, almost by miracle, it turns on. I accelerated and I don't know how, but in a few minutes we reached the central station where my cousin would leave. When he got off, I told him not to tell anything to the family about that. I went to the warehouse, and while they were unloading, I took the opportunity to go to buy myself a coffee. I wanted to calm my nerves, since I was still in panic about what had happened to us. And the employee who attended noticed it. And in that he asked me if everything was fine, to which I replied, hesitating, that yes. But he told me, "You're just scared, right, friend? Is that why you come so upset?" I had to tell him what happened. I didn't give a fuck that he would judge me. The truth, I needed to vent with someone. And after telling him everything, he told me, "Don't worry, other drivers. This has also happened to them, but some have not run so lucky, because when they do not start their trailers, they have seen the horrible face of that apparition." When I finished my coffee and calmed down, I went back to the winery. And although they discharged me quickly, I waited for the sunrise to return. I did not want to run into that thing again, since I had to go back alone. After I returned to my house, I called my cousin to ask him what he saw, since I didn't see what he saw. And he told me what he saw. He said it looked like a dead person, and that instead of eyes, he had 2 horrible black holes, like those of a corpse. Thank God and luckily, they no longer sent me to that winery. And the next year, I left that company and entered another, with local trips. My name is Pablo. My father and my grandfather were trailer drivers, and I ended up being one too. I've driven on almost all the roads in Mexico. One day someone asked me if I had experienced something paranormal, but I didn't believe in that. However, over time, my opinion changed. And today I want to share with you an experience that has left me marked for many years. I had a trip from Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, to the port of Lázaro Cárdenas, in Michoacán. I was carrying a light load, and in the port I would pick up another one. I left Tamaulipas early to get to the port at dawn. I calculated that it would be about 15 to 18 hours. I remember having passed through the city of Morelia at about 7 in the afternoon. And the last journey would take me between 5 to 6 hours from there to the port. Since I had plenty of time, I decided to save some money and not take the highway. Already on the outskirts of the city, I stopped for a coffee on the side of the road. I saw that there were some colleagues there. They asked me where I was going, and I told them that my destination was Cardenas. They were surprised because I had not taken the highway. I told them that it was still early, and I also wanted to save some money, and in that one of them told me that to every driver who passed by that road, strange things happened to him. Look, buddy, I advise you not to take that route at night, because a girl appears out there, dressed in white, and asking for a ride. However, even if you don't pick her up, she will appear on your side, sitting in the seat. And from the fright of seeing her, many companions have met with accidents, and some have even died. When I heard that, I was incredulous, and I told him that I didn't believe those nonsense. However, he told me, "No, my son, don't worry, don't get angry. I just wanted to tell you. You will know what you do, but then don't say that we didn't warn you." I said goodbye to them and took my coffee. Luckily, it would arrive at dawn and I could rest for a while. I took my way. I remember that it was drizzling, and further on there began to be fog, and a few kilometers more, I saw in my mirror the lights of an ambulance that was signaling me to overtake me, so I decreased my speed and gave way. In those times we communicated with the radio of the trailer, and I was listening to music, when suddenly I heard something on the radio. The message was clear. This companion was in trouble, or they were robbing him. I tried to communicate with him, but I couldn't. My frequency seemed to be dead. Perhaps it was because of the area, so I had no choice but to listen to him. Kilometers further on, in the distance I saw that ambulance that had overtaken me. It was stopped in the middle of the road. When I got there, I stopped, and I saw that there was a trailer folded. When I got down, I saw that in the windshield sign, the word Dandy was written, and later on there was the driver, but covered with a white blanket. He had collapsed, perhaps because of the weight of the load, but something didn't fit me, because there was no other vehicle involved or some animal run over. I didn't know what had happened, and the ambulance had been passing me by for a while, but I had heard his message on the radio, just a few minutes ago. I asked the paramedics what had happened, and one of them told me that they had been called a while ago from that accident, since a vehicle that came in the opposite direction saw the event and warned. But in that, the other paramedic stopped him and said something. One more, the one with the white dress. Immediately after hearing that, I remembered what that driver had told me. But what I didn't understand was how they had alerted them about the accident, if I had barely heard it minutes before. So I didn't say anything. I just waited for them to unlock the path a little. However, I decided to tell a policeman what I had heard on the radio. After doing so, this very serious man told me, "Friend, you are new to these paths, right? You had never been here at night? Look, it's not to scare him or lie to him, but on this path, things have been very strange for a long time. Well, here was a very bad accident. A trailer crashed into a car where there was a young woman and she crashed into a tree. That young woman, as they said, was going to a party in the town and she was wearing a white party dress. She ran out of the windshield. When her family arrived, her mother was very upset, blaming the driver, and threatened him with death. Later we learned that that woman, her mother, was one of those that do witchcraft. And since then, that young woman in white has been walking down this road, asking for a ride. But no one sees her face. And no one knows if it's the girl's ghost, or if it's that witch. Only the trailers tell them. The people of the town say it's because of that witch's malice. And the thing is that it is said that if you do not stop to pick her up, she appears to you in the seat of the co-pilot. And when you look at her, you may die of the scare or an accident. I could not believe what he was telling me. I could not believe that this was true. And I was so incredulous. After about 20 minutes, they cleared the area and I was able to leave and continue with my path. I will never forget that, the time I stopped being incredulous. My name is Juan, and I work in a hospital in the center of the city of Monterrey. On one occasion, I was talking to a man who was a trailer driver, and I asked him if he had ever seen something on the road. And this is what he told me. This happened to me at a point heading to Hermosillo. It's called Puerto San Luis. On that occasion, the trailer was failing. It seemed to be a diesel hose. When I stopped, I couldn't move forward, and that's when the night caught me. In that area there was no sign or anything around and it was a tremendous cold. I had to get into the cellar and stay there. However, a few minutes later I began to hear from afar sounds of laughter and whispers that scared me a lot. But as the minutes passed I couldn't hear anything anymore, and I fell asleep. The next day, I remember it snowed, and the snow reached almost a meter high. I couldn't go anywhere, and so I spent the whole day. At 10 o'clock at night, I suddenly heard the door knock. I looked immediately and with a lot of fear to see who it was, and I saw that there was a couple of old men. It was strange for me that they were there at that time, because no one passed by, since there was no access. I greeted them and asked them what they were doing there, and they told me that they wanted to give me something to eat that they had prepared, and also that they had brought me wine or tequila that they had. But the curious thing was that they insisted that I take it, because otherwise, they told me that the next day I was not going to wake up alive. I ended up listening to their recommendation, and then they told me that they wanted to take me to their house, that it wasn't that far. But I didn't do it on purpose, so I stayed in the trailer, and that's how the night went. I couldn't stop thinking about that old couple. I remember that at dawn, I heard the sound of a machine that was scraping the ice and opening the way to circulation. After that, I heard the voice of two people who said, "Check the trailer, lest he be dead." In that they touched the window, and I saw that they were two federal policemen on the road. They asked me if I was okay. I told them yes, and they told me that the people who stayed there at night, in those climatic conditions, normally, no longer dawned. I told them after that I was helped by an old couple, that they had brought me dinner and something to drink. When I finished telling them that, both stared at each other. And after that, they told me to follow them to the mountain. I got out very curious, and in that I saw that very far away there was an abandoned little house. The officers told me that that was the house of the old people who had visited me that night. However, they told me that that elderly couple had died many years ago. That left me very impressed. I don't know if scared, but what I am is that I was grateful to that couple. In fact, even today I still am, because that couple saved me from dying that cold night. I would like to tell you a story that happened to me several years ago, on the highway from Fresnillo to San Luis Potosi. I was about 15 years old back then, driving trailers on that route, but I'll never forget what I lived one night while I was there. I was carrying the truck, as usual. It was like 11 at night, and I still had a long stretch to cover. It was too heavy for me because I was slow. Tiredness sometimes wins us, and we have to go to rest or get a coffee to wake up. I stopped there near a place known as Guadalupe, to get down to check the tires and to stretch for a while. I left the unit on. There was almost no traffic. The traffic was quiet when I got down. I heard people talking behind me. When I turned, I saw that it was a middle-aged man. He was wearing brown pants, boots and a windbreaker jacket. He greeted me and asked me where he was going. I was a little scared because I thought he wanted to jump me, but luckily that didn't happen. I told him I was going to San Luis Potosi and he asked me if I could give him a ride to where his truck was parked. Then I asked him if he was also a trailer driver and he said yes, so that's why I was more relaxed to take him. However, when I got into the cabin, I felt a very strong cold from behind. I never saw this man open the door or get up, but when I got up, he was already up. The strange thing is that I could not see his eyes, since he was wearing a black hood. I could only see his nose and mouth. I pulled and saw that the lights on the board started to blink. This is shorting out, I told him. I wanted to turn on the focus of the cabin, but the gentleman told me not to, that maybe with the march I would win again. It's cold, I couldn't take it off. I felt horrible. We started to move forward and between talk and talk. The man told me that he missed his family, that he had a lot of time driving, and that he was thirsty. Later, we were already on a good stretch of the road, and that's when he tells me, "Look, there's the restaurant. If you like, we'll go for a coffee." There I have my truck parked. I swear that I had never seen a restaurant that way in my life. But I thought that because I was driving concentrated, maybe that's why I had never paid attention. After a few meters, I stopped, and the restaurant looked weird. It was painted white, with pastel colors. I turned off the trailer and got off, and again, I didn't see that man coming down opening the door. But when I saw him, I was already at the entrance to the restaurant. I took everything and we went to sit at a round wooden table. I don't know, everything was strange, the truth. The place looked completely new. There was not even dust. There were two people sitting on different tables, giving us their backs. In the bar was a lady, but she had a really strange face. She was very thin. And just then the man started telling me that things had changed a lot. I still didn't see her face, because she was talking to me looking down, and in that she asks me, "How long have I been driving?" I told him about 15 years. "No, friend, you still have many kilometers to go. Unfortunately, my car ran out of gas a long time ago." When he told me that, I didn't know what to tell him, and immediately, I started to feel like vomiting. I immediately asked where the bathroom was, but that lady didn't even listen to me, so I went out of there, to throw up next to the establishment. Already there, I started to feel very bad. I thought they had thrown something at me in the coffee. And without further ado, after that, I fainted. I remember that when I woke up, it was already in the morning, and a roadside federal was talking to me. I asked what he had, if he was okay. I was still confused. I asked him where he was, and he told me it was at kilometer 49. But the restaurant, where is it? What restaurant? There's nothing here, friend. This man helped me get up. He asked for my documents. Thank God I always had everything in order. So I was talking to him and I told him that back there I had picked up a man, a truck driver, and that we stopped right there. Then the federal told me to follow him, and we started walking a stretch in the mountain, and a few meters later, there was an abandoned construction, old and ugly. There was a restaurant here a long time ago. It was famous in those years, until a truck crashed and killed many people, the officer told me. I turned pale from the impression and didn't know what to say. After a few minutes, I returned to my trailer and grabbed my way. When I arrived at my destination, I began to tell a colleague what happened to me, and he told me, "No, man, there where you picked up that gentleman, he appears there. By miracle you didn't kill yourself on the way. Several have run into him and have had serious accidents. The truth is that I don't know what to think. Sometimes my head turns remembering that, and I can't have an explanation." That was my story, of what one as a trailer driver lives on some occasions, going down the road. I've been a grocery carrier for many years, and I would dare to say that I could call myself a road veteran. Throughout the time, listening to paranormal stories made me do something very common, but I had never taken them seriously. This has always been the case, until I had to live something so traumatic that it totally changed my way of seeing things. I avoid traveling at night because of the risk of fighting sleep or driving on incautious roads. However, even taking these measures, one cannot simply say no. It turns out that due to some setbacks in the company, they had been confused with the days of load. In other words, we were very late with the cargo ship's recipient. That was why they called me to leave urgently with this request. My destiny was to arrive at the capital of San Luis as expected. It was nightfall while I was traveling, but the road was quite clean and could be seen with good vision. I was driving without major worries when suddenly in the distance I saw a herd of goats crossing the middle of the road. To avoid any inconvenience, I began to slow down to give these animals time to cross the asphalt. But there was something that told me that things were not going well, and in that precise instant, it was that I noticed that in the middle of these goats there was a very black one that protruded from the others due to its large size. I stopped the trailer and turned on the high lights. I looked carefully, as there was something that gave me a bad feeling, and this situation would continue to get weirder. At that moment I opened my eyes wide in surprise to see how these animals had dispersed around that great goat, forming a kind of circle in the middle of the road. And there, having it in front of me, I could see better the face of this black goat. It was scary, grotesque. It was not compared to any other animal I had seen before. But what made me most horrified was to see those two big eyes that I could notice that they were red. A sudden fear paralyzed me. I could not move or look away from that strange being. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cover my eyes to get out of that place quickly, but there was nothing I could do. My body did not respond at all. Those minutes seemed eternal to me, where that animal and I just stared at each other. But suddenly, silence broke. When this goat started to bark, making that characteristic sound of these animals, I was terrified and began to cry in terror when I saw how that goat separated its two hind legs and then walked up to where I was, and as he was meters away from me, he began to walk from left to right and to the other side, without stopping to look at me. To this day, just remembering the noise of those bushes on the I felt discomfort, and this animal, in a very abrupt way, gave another tremendous sound, and he began to approach my window. Desperate, I reacted and took the crucifix that I always carry. But I could not articulate a word, until I was able to babble with great effort, asking God for help. At that moment, I recovered the movement of my body, and without thinking, I stepped on the accelerator and went away in a hurry. I didn't care about hitting any goats. All I thought about at that moment was escaping from that place. It's difficult to describe what I felt leaving there. A mix of emotions, relief on one hand, and on the other, a sensation of being pursued. Every so often I looked in the mirrors to see if this thing wasn't coming after me. The rest of the trip continued to be horrible. I felt like I was falling apart, I was short of breath, and my head hurt a lot, but I didn't want to stop for anything in the world. After a few kilometers, I saw a few houses and headed there to find the company of other people. I needed to vent to someone and tell them what had happened to me. I arrived and parked under one of the trees. Almost instantly, a man came out with a young boy. They came out and asked me if I was well, since they had seen me quite pale. I told them what happened to me, but strangely this man didn't seem to be at all surprised. When I finished telling him everything, he looked at the boy and told him to go inside, with the excuse of going to accommodate the guest room. Once alone, he told me that I had seen the goat man, the devil himself, since in the area where I found him, it was very common that he disappeared. That man offered me his house to spend the night, but my mind was already very overwhelmed by thoughts of oppression. I then opted to decline his offer and decided to withdraw from the area. This man asked me to drive calmly and not to try to think about what had happened to me, since it would end up completely suggesting me and this would be very dangerous to drive. I said goodbye and went straight to the capital. Luckily, I didn't have any other trouble on the trip. I arrived at my destination around 9 in the morning. Then I delivered the cargo. But I was in a daze. I couldn't believe everything I had seen. At first I decided not to tell anyone what had happened to me, because what would they think of me? Surely they would think I was crazy. However, a few days later, I decided to tell it to a group of very close friends of mine. They told me that everything was a product of my tiredness, and to not travel through that area again. Until today I haven't been able to overcome that. Sometimes I see that goat man in my dreams. However, after that I started going to church very often, and I can say that today my faith is totally renewed. Around 10 o'clock at night, we were traveling from Victoria to Rio Verde. We were 3 companions making a convoy. I was in the middle, and at that moment I noticed that my companion ahead was hit by a tire from the second trailer. I told him on the radio to pull over. We were just before arriving at Cerritos. This companion didn't have much experience. In fact, he only had like a month that he had started working. He was also about 22 years old. In the end, we helped him change the tire, and while chatting we were laughing. At that same moment, we heard as if someone were clapping, and the rest sounded like murmurs. The 3 of us immediately turned to look around us looking for someone. I, at that very moment, knew that I had not been the only one who had heard that, but none of us said anything. So we kept changing the tire, between jokes and laughter. We laughed again, but again we heard the same thing, and then again, just murmurs. The laughter disappeared in a matter of seconds, and one of my companions said, "Did you hear that?" We responded that yes, we had heard it a while ago. I told them to hurry, since I was very nervous, and seeing the faces of my companions, I also noticed that they were as nervous as I was. So we hurried. For a moment we heard footsteps as if more people were around us, but we couldn't see anything. After changing the tire, we continued on our way, but a few minutes later I noticed that the truck of my young companion was moving from one side to the other as if he were losing control. I started talking to him on the radio and he responded to me with a very agitated voice, saying, "Help me. Help me, death is coming here with me." After saying those words, he suddenly stopped and ran off. When we got off, we saw this poor young man who was very pale and sweaty, very scared. We asked him, "What happened? What was it? What made him run away like that?" He told us that a blonde woman was sitting in the passenger seat and was telling him, "You're going to kill yourself. You're going to kill yourself," and that she was moving the steering wheel from one side to the other. After that, we checked the trailer, but we didn't find anyone. The scare my partner got was too much, so much so that he never drove a trailer again.